Wildfire Horror Story number 1. The Embers Never Lie. The hills surrounding Santa Carina were ablaze. Fires weren't new to the town. Every year, like clockwork, the dry season brought red skies and ash-covered mornings. But this fire was different. The heat wasn't just oppressive. It felt personal, as if it sought out specific lives to destroy. Alex Reyes sat in traffic on the evacuation route, the line of cars stretching endlessly. Smoke clouded the horizon, and the faint smell of burning pine mixed with something sharper, almost metallic. His daughter, Lily, sat in the back seat, clutching her stuffed rabbit wide-eyed and silent. "We're going to be okay, sweetheart," Alex said, though his voice wavered. The car radio crackled with updates, a monotone announcer describing how the fire had jumped another containment line, moving closer to their route. But it wasn't the first fire that truly unsettled Alex. It was the whispers. He'd first heard them 2 nights ago, as the fire crept over the ridge toward their neighborhood. Faint, unintelligible murmurs just outside his bedroom window, like a crowd gathered in his backyard. When he checked, there was nothing but smoke. "Dad," Lily said softly, pulling him from his thoughts. "Are they going to find us?" Alex's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Who, baby?" Lily hesitated. "The people in the fire." A chill spread down Alex's spine. "What people?" "The ones that talk at night," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the smoke billowing in the distance. Alex forced a smile. "It's just the wind, sweetheart, nothing to worry about." But Lily wasn't convinced, and neither was Alex. He remembered the strange dreams that had plagued him the past week. Dreams of faces forming in the flames, their mouths open in silent screams. And the way the fire had seemed to spread faster than it should, as if it was chasing something. A sudden knock on his window startled him. A firefighter in soot-streaked gear leaned down. "Sir, you need to turn around," she said urgently. "The fire's jumped ahead. This route isn't safe anymore." "What?" Alex stammered. "But this is the evacuation route." The firefighter shook her head. "It's boxed in. Turn back and take Canyon Road. It's your best chance." Reluctantly, Alex followed the others who were turning their cars around. Canyon Road was narrow and winding, cutting through dense forest. As they drove, the smoke grew thicker, and the whispers returned. Louder this time. They seemed to echo inside the car. "Dad, look!" Lily cried, pointing out the window. Through the haze, Alex saw them, figures standing among the trees, their forms flickering like mirages in the heat. They were still, their heads turned toward the road, their eyes. Alex couldn't describe their eyes. It hurt to look at them. "Close your eyes, Lily," he said, his voice shaking. "Don't look at them." Lily obeyed, clutching her rabbit tighter. Alex pressed the gas pedal, his heart pounding. The figures didn't move, but he felt their gaze following him, burning into the back of his neck. The road twisted sharply, and Alex's headlights illuminated a fallen tree blocking the way. He cursed under his breath and slammed on the brakes. They were trapped. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them like smoke. Alex's phone buzzed in the cup holder, its screen flashing a notification he'd never seen before. "Stay where you are. They're coming." "What the heck?" he muttered, picking it up. The phone's screen went black, and the radio cut out, replaced by static. The car suddenly felt too small, too fragile. A flicker of light drew his attention to the rearview mirror. The fire was close now, flames licking at the edges of the road, but it wasn't the fire that terrified him. It was the figures emerging from the smoke, dozens of them, their forms distorted as if they were made of ash and embers. Lily whimpered in the back seat. "Dad, they're here." Alex's hands shook as he tried to restart the car. The engine sputtered but refused to turn over. Come on," he yelled, slamming the steering wheel. The figures were closer now, their whispers becoming words. He couldn't understand them, but their tone was unmistakable. Anger, sorrow, accusation. One figure reached the car, its hand, if it could be called that, pressing against the window. The glass hissed and cracked under the heat. Alex turned to shield Lily, but she was staring at the figure, her face pale. "They want us to listen," she said. No, Alex said firmly. Don't listen to them. But the whispers filled the car now, drowning out everything else. Alex could feel them in his head, digging into memories he'd tried to forget. The night he'd left the campfire smoldering in the hills behind his old home, the fire that had spread faster than anyone expected, consuming acres of forest in the small community nearby. He told himself it wasn't his fault, that the fire was an accident, but the whispers told a different story. Lily's voice broke through the noise. Dad, is it true? Alex couldn't answer. The weight of guilt was suffocating. The figures pressed closer, their eyes glowing like embers. He could see their faces now, faces he recognized. Faces from news reports, faces of people who'd lost their lives in the fire he'd started. I'm sorry, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. The whispers stopped. The figures stared at him for what felt like an eternity, their eyes burning with a mix of rage and sorrow. Then, one by one, they turned and disappeared into the smoke. The car engine roared to life on its own, startling Alex. He didn't question it. He drove, navigating around the fallen tree and down the winding road. When they finally reached the highway, the air was clear, the fire a distant glow on the horizon. Lily was quiet, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. Dad, she said, after a long silence, they forgave you. Alex didn't reply. He couldn't shake the feeling that forgiveness came with a price. As they drove away from the fire, he realized the whispers had stopped completely. They were faint now, just beneath the edge of hearing, a constant reminder that embers never truly die. Wildfire Horror Story number 2. The Silent Inferno. When the wildfire warnings came, as they always did in late summer, the residents of Dovemont barely reacted. The town's position in the shadow of Mount Reynaldo had always shielded it from the worst of the seasonal blazes. To the townsfolk, the fires were a far-off menace, their smoke plumes a grim but distant reminder of nature's fury. This year, though, the smoke didn't stay far away. It started with the sky turning an unnatural orange. Paige Walker's kids had been playing in the backyard when she noticed the eerie stillness. No wind, no birds, just the oppressive hum of distant flames. The air tasted of ash, and a low vibration thrummed in her chest. Something about it felt wrong. Not just dangerous, but wrong. By midnight, the fire was visible from her living room window, a blazing wall crawling down the mountain with a precision that made her stomach churn. Paige tried to focus on packing essentials for evacuation, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She told herself it was just nerves. Fires were unpredictable. They moved fast, but deep down she knew this fire wasn't behaving like any other. Her phone buzzed. An emergency alert flashed. Evacuate immediately. Do not wait for responders. She grabbed her kids, a few bags, and their dog Max, and loaded the car. As she backed out of the driveway, she glanced at her neighbor, Mrs. Cordova's house. The lights were off. Strange. Paige knew the elderly woman rarely left her home. The evacuation route wound through dense forest. Paige turned onto the main road and saw dozens of taillights ahead, crawling forward in a sluggish convoy. Her youngest, Ellie, whimpered from the back seat. Mommy, why is it so quiet? She asked. Paige's brow furrowed. She rolled down her window slightly, expecting to hear the distant roar of the fire, but there was nothing. No wind, no crackling of burning wood, just an eerie, suffocating silence. Max began to growl, low and guttural. Paige glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him staring out the window, his fur bristling. She followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the flicker of flames. It was darker, almost human-shaped, but elongated as if it hadn't been stretched. What is that? Paige whispered to herself. The line of cars came to a halt. Frustrated, she tapped her steering wheel. She leaned out the window to see what was happening but froze. The fire was no longer on the mountain. It had somehow leaped ahead of them, blocking the road. Flames licked at the asphalt, yet the wall of fire stood eerily still, as though waiting. Panic spread through the convoy. Some drivers began to turn their cars around, creating chaos on the narrow road. Paige's phone buzzed again. This time the alert was garbled. The words scrambled as if the system itself was breaking down. Stay. Remain. Do not leave. She tried calling 911, but the line was dead. The kids were crying now, Max barking furiously. The fire behind them began to creep closer, inch by inch, as if herding them towards the wall of flames ahead. Paige's breaths came in shallow gasps. There was no way out. "Mom," said her older son, Ben, his voice trembling. "I think someone's outside." Paige turned to look. Through the haze, she saw shapes moving along the edges of the road. Not firefighters, not evacuees. These figures were wrong, their limbs bending at unnatural angles. Their eyes glowed faintly, like embers. They moved without sound, gliding closer. Max's barking turned frantic as one of the figures approached the car. It pressed a hand against the driver's side window, leaving a blackened smear. Paige recoiled, her pulse racing. The thing's face was a void, empty except for faint, shifting patterns, like smoke caught in a jar. She slammed the car into reverse, narrowly avoiding collision as she maneuvered through the gridlock. She didn't know where to go. The fire was everywhere now, surrounding them. She drove blindly, taking side roads and gravel paths, her headlights cutting through the thick smoke. The kids huddled in the back seat, crying quietly. At last, she spotted a clearing up ahead, an old ranger station she'd passed once years ago. She pulled up and ushered the kids inside, bolting the door behind them. The station was abandoned, its windows shattered, but it felt safer than the open road. Max paced nervously, growling at the shadows outside. Paige tried to catch her breath, but the oppressive silence pressed down on her. Even the kids seemed to sense it. Ellie tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, they're here." Paige turned and saw them. The figure stood at the edge of the clearing, watching. They didn't move, but their presence was suffocating. She could feel their gaze, heavy with accusation, and then she understood. The fire wasn't random. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was them. They were the fire, their anger and pain fueling the inferno. Paige remembered the stories she'd heard growing up, whispers about a wildfire decades ago that had claimed an entire community. A community erased by negligence, their deaths written off as an act of God. She'd always thought it was just a ghost story, but now the ghosts were real, and they were here. One of the figures stepped forward, its form flickering like a dying flame. Paige's throat tightened as it reached out for a hand. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to take it. Her fingers brushed against its smoky palm, and a flood of images filled her mind. Faces twisted in agony, flames consuming homes, a woman clutching her child as the fire closed in. "I'm sorry," Paige whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry." The figure stared at her for a moment, then withdrew its hand. The others began to fade, their forms dissolving into the smoke. Outside, the flames dimmed, retreating into the forest. The silence lifted, replaced by the distant crackle of a normal wildfire. Paige collapsed to her knees, holding her children close. Max sat beside them, his tail wagging weakly. They were alive, but she knew the fire hadn't spared them out of mercy. It had spared them because they'd listened. As dawn broke over Dovemont, Paige looked out at the scorched landscape. The fire crews would arrive soon, and they'd call it a miracle that the ranger station had survived. But Paige knew better. The fire wasn't done. It was simply waiting for someone else to forget.